This is Build Where You Are, an educational podcast series that is for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. Build Where You Are brings you the raw and uncut journeys of entrepreneurs across a range of industries. From food and beverage to apparel and business services, tune in to Season 1 to hear how 10 entrepreneurs built their businesses from the ground up. Welcome to another episode of Build Where You Are, a podcast by ESO Ventures. I'm your host, Akintunde Ahmad, and we're here in downtown Oakland again at Kim Folks. I'm super excited to introduce today's guest, somebody who I've actually you know people online and you follow folks, you see their brand, you run
Instagram friends
right
before we knew each other.
It's so we've been in the same social circles and social networks for some time, and more recently just connected. And so without further ado, we're here with Randy Wells of Rockridge. And so I want to turn it over to you to give a brief intro and kind of just jump right into it. The foundation of Rockridge and how this came to be.
Yeah. So I'm the founder, artistic director of Rockridge, which basically means that from running the business on the operational side to running the business from a creative standpoint, sort of have my hands in both ends of the pie, which are both fun as well as stressful. The brand was started back in 2016, 2017, really I think one of the things that I felt was missing was a brand that really kind of spoke to the mindset of an entrepreneur. Not so much, I think, the lifestyle of an entrepreneur, but even just the mindset of what it takes to actually build a brand and build a business. And that combined with the fact that I felt like what was also missing in Oakland was a clothing brand that was actually named after a neighborhood that could be both aspirational and inspirational to further push this spirit of entrepreneurialism within Oakland. And I also used to live in Rockridge, so the brand is also a bit autobiographical in a sense too.
Got it. I went to school in Rockridge. I'm from East Oakland originally, but my mom taught at Chabot in North Oakland. I was familiar, and I actually never knew that was the case. I didn't know, because Rockridge is also, it just sounds cool. It's the alliteration, everything. So I wasn't sure what the origin was. And so take us back then to, I guess, your history and interaction with apparel and clothing. Was this something that you were always into fashion or designing, or was it just man, I know I could do this, or how did that start?
Yeah, so it was the most, I've worked in fashion and marketing I worked in marketing for close to 20 plus years. I spent the most of my time in fashion, and I think that's always been my first love.
Yep.
And my first job, right out of graduate school in New York as an intern, was working at Echo Unlimited with Mark Echo and helping launch the G Unit clothing brands, helping continue to build and grow Echo Unlimited. And I think that's where I sort of got my first start of actually seeing sort of behind the scenes on what does it take to build a brand. But even more so, I think what I was really drawn to was this New York entrepreneurial spirit of you just make it happen. And I think the other thing I would say to that was, still to this day, I think Echo Unlimited probably had the most talented collection of creatives and designers that look like me that I had ever seen before. So I think that was probably the first taste of wanting to work in fashion. I sort of bebopped around and worked for other brands and did other things. I worked for Men's Warehouse and Jose Bank. You living out here, I've worked in gaming. But I think no matter where my career has taken me, it's always gone back to fashion.
Got it.
And I think in the beginning, it's just like fashion is a way of expressing yourself. I think creatively is just like, for me, it's a form of like wearable art, or it's a way in which to, sort of be part of this larger conversation around like culture.
Yeah.
So I think I sort of grew up in this like period of time where products became real collectible things that were like rooted in culture and rooted in aspirations that wasn't sort of a white cosmopolitan European sort of aesthetic.
Yeah.
But the idea of collecting Air Jordans rooted in basketball culture and African American. And I think because of that, I wanted to be a part of that. But I think more importantly, I always wanted to have my own business. And a big part of wanting to have my own business is just rooted in my belief that in this country, and I think in the capitalist system that we have, is just like to be free is to be economically independent. And so for me, it's just like, I think that for me, I'll say this: the path to being economically independent is being an entrepreneur. I don't think that's necessarily the path for everyone, and I certainly don't want to kind of create this dynamic that if you're not an entrepreneur, got a successful business, then it's just like you're an indentured servant, to a certain degree.
Yeah.
But I think for me, it's just like securing the resources and being have control over capital is important for me to be able to do what I want to do, work with who I want to work with, dress how I want to dress without any sort of consequence.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's fairly consistent with what ESO Ventures kind of stands for, and that our whole goal is to create and support and grow more entrepreneurs in our community, because we do want, that financial freedom. But we also want folks to build things in their community, and that's where that shared prosperity model really comes about. It's like if you have something and you're doing it here, you're able to employ other folks, or at least inspire other folks, or show other people like, oh, this is how you do fashion brand. This is how you do the catering company. This is how you do the cosmetic or the beauty company, or whatever it may be. And so that definitely makes a lot of sense. So now going back, working with Echo Unlimited, especially during that time period too, of like, and thinking about Gian and just how, I don't know, I just think about being a kid and going to Macy's, all the different areas and seeing, that must have been a time. And I'm curious, the marketing side is one thing, but then the actual design and construction is like a whole separate side of things. And so this question is two-part. One, when it comes to design and construction, is that something you do, or do you work with other people? And then the second portion of it is, as it relates to at least some of the things that I've seen from Rockridge, a lot of it is, a lot of people think like, oh, I'm going to do a clothing brand, I'll do this. And it's like, I'm going to slap a logo on something. But the pieces that y'all have are not like that. It's like you actually have, cut and sew. Right, cut and sew. And so I'm wondering, coming from Echo, which was such a graphic design, big logos, things there, how that might have inspired or at least influenced the way that you approach Rockridge.
So to answer the first question, I do most of the design work. And I would say I probably do like 60% of the design in terms of like I'm designing all of the graphics, selecting all of the fabrics, I'm sourcing all of the fabrics. And then I do work with a small team of technical pattern makers and production people that will fine tune those measurements, and will help sort of consult with me on interacting with the factories to make sure that like the fits and the measurements and the sizing is correct. So in that sense, it's just like what I would say is like, I am not sort of traditionally educated as a designer. I think what I bring to the table is a strong point of view. And I think I bring enough knowledge to be dangerous, but also enough humility to know that I need help in certain areas. And then I think to answer the other question, which is why start with cut and sew as opposed to generic pieces. I think the one thing I'm still conscientious of to this day when it comes to Rockridge is just that the fashion space and menswear in particular is such a hyper competitive space that differentiation is key. And so while it would have been easy for me to buy blank t-shirts or blank sweaters or blank button downs and like screen print on them, I think it would have been harder for me to be able to sell those goods, and it would have been harder for me to be able to actually have a product when people touch it that feels different than what they already have. And so some of the insights that I've learned during this journey is that when you're launching something new, the customers are more likely to try something new when it's different than what they already have versus something that is similar. Whether it's on price point or whether it's the quality of the fabric or whether it's the quality of the cut, like any one of those things that differentiates your product from what they already have, there's a greater chance that they're going to buy it.
That makes sense. I feel like that's consistent, like with a lot of industries also. It's like if you open a taqueria in Oakland, it's like, I mean, good luck getting folks to trade out their old ones. But if it's like, oh, we're opening some Caribbean fusion food, it's like, I don't know, try that. Right. Peruvian something. It's like, okay. And, you know, obviously as somebody who works in this field as well, I think, and this is really a question for you, I think a lot of times when we look into the menswear space and we see some of these, you know, larger and well-known brands, or even some folks who are venturing in that space, a lot of times it seems achievable because some of the folks who are doing it. So if you see like Russell Westbrook has Honor the Gift, and like, oh, well, if he started his brand, but it's like, but also is Russell Westbrook, who has millions of followers, as an NBA player, and the network to be able to get different people to wear things. And it's like, you know, and he also does a lot of cut and sew things as well. So maybe that was the best example, but you know, for some folks who do have a logo or it's like the branding associated with it, for some of those newer brands, they come with a huge following and a lot of clout, notoriety, and also connections to people already, as opposed to if you're somebody who doesn't already have a big backing for whatever product you want to drop, then it is like you need to create something that is cut differently, or just the item itself with no branding may also just attract somebody's eyes. And I'm kind of just picking up what you're putting down, but also just like sharing a similar understanding of the space. And so as you were, you know, designing things and thinking about fabrics and cuts and things, as it related to actually getting these things seen by people and now generating this audience and this customer, how did that come about? Were you making things for yourself first? Like, oh, I like how this fits, or I like these materials, or was it like...
Yeah, it's funny, man, because true story, I first started off with like, I just want to make a button down shirt. And I didn't really think it would be that hard. And at the time, this was like at the peak of like a ton of D2C brands were popping up, making menswear button down shirts or t-shirts. Like Everlane had just like popped up. That's probably like the most notable one that popped up, and like they built their business off a white t-shirt. And so at the time, the conventional wisdom was like, you should have like this one hero product that everybody is aware of and sort of build around that. And for me, it was like the white button down shirt. And in part it was because pre-COVID days, that was probably the most consistent garment that I would wear, is just like button downs and jeans. And it actually turned out to be much harder than I thought it was to actually make. And part of that was like, I'm searching for factories, and, you know, I wanted to do it local so that I could actually be part of the process. So I think like a lesson 101, like when you reach out to a factory and ask them if they can do this, 90% of the time they will always say yes, even if they can't.
That's true.
It's like, and course. So I actually found this factory that was like, they actually made women's blouses, but they're like, yeah, we can like make a button down shirt. So every time I'm coming to this factory, they're like, they're showing me a sample, but it's in like different fabric, and it's like a softer fabric. And then, maybe by the second or third time, I'm like, like the cuffs are off, the fit isn't right, like the placket doesn't really make sense. And I'm like, it can't possibly be this hard. And then it dawned on me, it's like, they did say they make women products. They can't make this. So I ended up finding a factory in Brooklyn. I sent them the same tech pack, and on the first sample, it was 95% right.
Finding a manufacturer 101. It's like it's different. And made in America.
Yeah, finding a factory is hard. Finding a factory in America is hard, and then actually finding a factory that can actually make what you're looking for, like that's like the trifecta.
Yeah.
Much easier to do in Asia than it is to find in the U.S. But it's funny, man, because again, it's like you work with factories, and a lot of times they're so hungry for the business that they will always say, yes, we can do it.
Yeah.
And it's not until you get that first or second sample, and generally by the first sample, like, they don't know what to do. It's just like pay the $200 for the sample and like move on.
Yeah.
But I think to go to your second point is, I think when you're building something small, and this is something that I've been sharing with a couple of people over the last couple of weeks, especially in Oakland, is like, the idea isn't big enough. It's just like, I feel like everybody is like, I want to build this company, but it's like, if you were to look at it in economic terms, it would be like a medium-sized business. It's like, you want to build a business that does like $1 to $2 million a year in revenue, which is like totally fine. But some of these people, I'm like, but if you actually look at the market opportunity, like this is probably like a $10 to $20 million business. And so start small, but think big.
Yeah.
And give yourself like a 3 to 5 year business plan on like, how do you get there? So for me, when I think about Rockridge, probably the first couple of years, it was, we need to be a brand that can compete within LA, and we can compete within New York. And strategically, like, that was wrong in the sense that we don't have the brand awareness, we don't have a Russell Westbrook, we don't have the capital to be able to compete like that. And I think over the last couple of years, and I've been traveling a lot, what I've come to realize is that what's missing in the global conversation around men's fashion is that there is no singular point of view of men's fashion in the Bay Area.
Definitely not.
It's just like, even the large brands that are here, like, don't really represent San Francisco. It's like Levi's is here, and it's really just their headquarters.
Right.
Like Gap is here, and they've been largely irrelevant for a very long time. And the smaller, medium-sized brands that are here, such as an Everlane or even like a Marine Layer, it's just like they kind of touch on San Francisco, but they don't really like own it. So for me, it's just like my strategic position is that Rockridge should and could be the brand that represents a strong point of view around entrepreneurship and fashion from the Bay Area. I was just like, and if we do that, then we are part of this conversation. But we're not competing in LA. We're not competing in New York. It's like we're competing in a geographic territory that even the brands that are here have abandoned. So it's a wide open lane for me.
And there's a fairly large market.
Huge
here
market.
Still, like it's
Chill. Chill. You can't tell the competition that. But yeah, I mean, what I would say is just that I don't see it as like it's a large market. I really see it as like there's a whole market that's ignored. It was just like, and I think that there are so many men and people in general that are really into fashion, and they're buying fashion brands that are based outside of San Francisco because aesthetically it speaks to them. Like, what if you offer that here with the caveat of we're building here in Oakland? Like, we're so Oakland, the name of the company is based off of a neighborhood in Oakland. And we will hire in Oakland, and the first retail concept store is in Oakland. So I think for me, it's just like, that's the goal is, how do we build the brand awareness and how do we grow the business from the geographic territory of like as far north as Sacramento to as far south as San Jose, so that everybody knows who and what Rockridge is. Um, and we have our spin and our aesthetic on where men's fashion is going towards the future. And at the same time as we do it, we're highlighting and spotlighting and supporting the next generation of entrepreneurs and leaders.
In the Bay Area, the like world capital of
Yeah.
like when
Yeah,
it comes
but
to,
it's like, and we also represent it
startup.
from the counterpoint of like, when I think about entrepreneurship, I don't think about like the next AI company that's raising a shit ton of money from Silicon Valley.
Yep.
Like, I think about a much more real world the much more real world and impactful entrepreneur, which is the person who is building a small business, the person who has a side hustle, the disenchanted person who just left Twitter or just got laid off from another tech company and is more interested in building something for themselves.
Yep.
Versus working for another company. And I also define it as, it's the creative, it's the artist, it's the coffee shop owner who's not only building great businesses, but they're also rebuilding communities.
Right. And I think I'm not trying to just like keep plugging the ESO venture side of things, but the whole build where you are motto, that's what it speaks to. It's like, where are you located? Why is that special to you? And how does building your brand or company or business in this area actually impact those around you or speak to that unique experience that you have? And then, what is the impact on those around you, from your neighborhood, in your wider community, however wide that may reach. And so I think that makes a lot of sense. So now just kind of get into some of like just the perhaps technical sides of things. So it's like, okay, we get samples, you're finding factories that are actually able to execute what it is that you sought out to make, which again is, especially in cut and sew, like that's one of those things. And that's why a lot of people do result in like, man, just too much. Give me the pre-made t-shirt that I know people like how it fits.
Right.
I'm gonna put some on there. But in this cut and sew space, now that you're doing that, how are you now, another two-part question, finding your target audience and like addressing, that total addressable market and who it is that you're trying to reach. How are you marketing to them and finding them? And then also, how are you making sure that they understand like what goes into this, right? Because some folks are like, oh, like you're new on the scene, not knowing, what I'm saying, your background is just like Rockridge is a new brand and this is the price point they're at. Like, I can go to whatever Gap and find something. It's like, it's not the same. Materials are different. Being made in America is a whole different price point in terms of like all of these things. How do those things balance out when it comes to finding a customer and making sure they're aware of that?
Yeah. Okay. What was the first one?
So the first one was just how are you more or less finding your customer and marketing and letting them know like, this is Rockridge, we're here, this is what we stand for.
Yeah.
And then the second part is
Give your marketing sort of a marketing hack 101.
Got you.
When you have finite dollars for money, when you have finite dollars for marketing, or when you say you have finite dollars, there's a certain amount of money that you have, and how you allocate it has to be able to drive a return. So when I think about marketing, what I really think about is brand awareness. It's less about how do I make the transaction, and it's more or less of how do I drive brand awareness. And in a real anecdotal sense, really focusing on Oakland and San Jose and a little bit of Sacramento and San Francisco, the city proper. When I think of marketing, like obviously there's a digital marketing component. I literally will go to like the U.S. Census or even like the Oakland City Council page and look at the census, and I will look at it just like, what's the total size of the population of Oakland? how many of them are men, how many of them are women. I break it down by age and geography and zip code.
Yeah.
I know that my primary paying customer is a male between the ages of 30 and 42. Like, I just have that data in Shopify. I also know that the second customer that I have is like the mom/wife who's shopping for the son and the boyfriend. I generally know that at my price point that there's an income level somewhere between like 80 and 150, $170,000 that they're spending. And so I take that data and I basically look at the overall population size of Oakland and I identify every zip code where these people are living, which is like, and then I do a lot of digital testing on like how to reach them. And so that's one part. The second part is that everywhere we show up, we need to show up with a very strong, consistent point of view. And so this is where like the retail residency that we'll be doing for the holidays, I think will be like a big push in terms of who the brand is and what the brand is about, because it'll be the first time that we actually story tell in a 3-dimensional space versus just being online. And then outside of that, it's a lot of networking and word of mouth between like you and Kinfolk and ESO and other entrepreneurs, both in front of the camera as well as behind the scenes. And I try to make it a point of working with people so that I'm expanding my network. And by expanding that network, I'm also expanding the brand and that brand reach.
It makes a lot of sense.
And I do all of that as an introvert, which is why I like traveling a lot of social circles and don't really know people, because I'll be the quietest person in the room.
You know yourself. That's very real. And then
Just trying to be real.
hey, and then kind of branching off of that, I kind of lumped too many questions into one, but I guess the follow up is like, well, I mean, part of that though was answered by that, because you're like, I know the price point in which I'm selling my items, and I know where my target audience who is willing to pay that lives. So on one hand, you're already targeting who you know is willing to pay for this.
I mean, I'm targeting people that I think will like the brand, and we do enough stuff where it's just like, I know like who's buying it and I know who's targeting it and where that overlap is.
Got it.
I'm not so concerned about price sensitivity because I don't think we're really expensive. I think it's more or less like we're new and no one has heard of us.
Gotcha.
And I think that once it's like, we heard of you, we like the product, like I've never had anyone push back on like the price. I think it's always just been like, one, you're online. And I think it's hard to sell a button-down shirt when it's online, because that's one of the few pieces of clothing that people like to try on.
For sure. For sure. Yeah.
And so, you know, like, how do you get around that barrier is, you know, doing a retail space later this year. Or I try and do, you know, events where people can actually try on the shirt, and sort of just kind of take that feedback in real time. The funny enough thing is just like anytime I've sold a product, generally the customers are like, this is too low, it should be higher.
Which is often the case. Well, congrats to you for not having folks push back. Because, you know, I have like a lot of friends in this space who have, you know, talked about this. And a lot of times I think there's a certain like demographic of folks who push back. And a lot of times it's like the comparison of like, oh, you think insert some European fashion house here. It's like, oh, you think you're this or that. And it's like, a lot of times folks don't have the foresight to understand like, these brands aren't reinvested in community or aren't benefiting you or anybody around you in any type of way. So we have to unpack that, but also, you know, the unwillingness to support and symbols of status. I think that's a whole other conversation.
There's also just like because this is ESO, like to be even more transparent.
Yeah.
Like, I personally don't really care about the price point. Like, the numbers that really matter to me is markup percentage, margin percentage, and unit cost. And my strategy is I always want my price to be relatively at the higher end of the market in terms of how I sort of price and position it.
Mhm.
But at the same time, I know that because I haven't established this brand in a way in which a John Elliott or an Amiri has, that it would be hard. Like I can price it at that price point, but again, it's just like if people are already buying Amiri,
Right.
and then I'm offering you something that's similar to Amiri but is at the same price, why would you buy it when you could just buy Amiri?
Yeah.
So for me, my goal is let me offer you a brand that is similar in aesthetic, and aspiration as an Amiri, but is priced differently because for me, it's just like I want to drive volume. Like
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily interested in being like a rarefied aspirational brand.
Yeah.
It's just like I want to be an accessible, like premium brand, high quality brand, but I don't need to be at those price points because I know that by doing that, I'm going to the people that I really want to see wearing the clothes are going to be priced out of it.
Right. And isolating them, and it's like, okay, now you get to that weird point of like, oh, wait a minute, like, who am I actually making this for, and what am, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, it's like you could create desire, and it doesn't have to be a $400 or $500 piece of garment.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like you can create. Like I can create desire by just making it scarce. Like I'm only gonna do 200 of these. I'm only gonna sell for this much, and when it's gone, it's gone. Maybe it'll come back in a different color, and
Yeah.
like that's that.
Right. I feel like you've just done a lot of research and understanding, you know, where you fit into just
Yeah.
this overall landscape of menswear. Or do you have any interest in women's wear, or is it all men's?
I do have an interest in women's wear,
Yeah.
but because I'm a dude, it's easier to make clothes for myself.
Gotcha.
But I have a business plan. Like women and kids are like part of that plan to kind of build out that team. Funny enough, I think I have a clearer idea of like what I would want to make for the woman customer.
Huh.
But we're getting there. I think one thing I want to touch on, you haven't asked it and you might ask it, but I think more than being like passionate about your business and fashion, I think you should be obsessive about it. And like I generally try not to talk too much about it because I'll go on and on and on and on and on and on and on. But
Yeah.
it's just like if I'm not thinking about my kids, like my business or like my sector of the industry is always on my mind.
Yeah.
Like I'm reading business of fashion all of the time. Like I read the McKinsey reports on fashion and technology that's impacting fashion. Like one trick that I think ESO aspiring entrepreneurs should do, and I do this all the time. Like I really love the business model of LVMH. And so one of the things that I do is actually read their annual reports. And one of the things that that I notice when I read their annual reports, they have never lost money. Ever. In 40 years that Bernard Arnault has been running the LVMH group, they have never lost money in a year. Even in COVID years, they have never lost money.
That's impressive.
So one piece of advice I would have is no matter what industry you're in, is just like everybody generally has like 1, 2, or 3 companies that they sort of admire in that space. If they're publicly traded companies, you should read their annual reports because the annual reports will tell you everything that you need to know on what they're spending on costs, how they make money, what categories that they drive more revenue in than others. And it gives you an insight into consumer preferences that you don't necessarily get from reading marketing reports.
I see. And that makes sense. And you'd be surprised oftentimes, especially like you said, with publicly traded companies around how much data is out there. But also, like I said, there's McKinsey reports, there's Nielsen reports where all of this data is tracked and actually shows demographics of folks and like this is where they're spending the most money. They spend this proportion of their income in luxury versus this demographic group. And so a lot of those things are broken down.
I'm building something on my website right now, like loosely called a toolkit. which is basically like all of the podcasts, all of the books, all of the reports, all of the apps that I subscribe to, like from the Wall Street Journal to the McKinsey reports to stuff on LinkedIn, all in like one space. So that I think anyone who is like interested in looking for something as an entrepreneur is like, if you go to my website, it's a good chance that you'll find something that'll kind of sort of send you in the right direction. But then I'm also including another section called office hours. On Mondays and Fridays, I'm blocking out 3 hours of time. And if you set up time, either I'll meet you at the store or we'll take a Zoom call, but 30 minutes, I will like listen to your pitch or listen to your issue or whatever it is and try and figure out how I can help you sort of move where you are from where you currently are to like the next step.
And I mean, as somebody who kind of jumped into entrepreneurship without any mentorship or, you know what I mean? It's kind of like, that is a very valuable resource to have folks in the community who are, you know what I'm saying? Like actually able to do that, and not the folks who are, you know, on Instagram trying to get you to buy their marketing course or trying to get you to buy the right. There's a lot, and you know that's one of the reasons why we wanted to do this podcast as well, because there's, you know, those folks are paying for ads and are trying to get you to buy this and whatever it may be, and they're not being honest and candid about what the everyday entrepreneur actually goes through and understanding like what that process actually is for folks. It is not I'm buying a Tesla and putting it on Turo, and next year at this time I'm gonna have hundreds of thousands in the bank or whatever.
I think most of the challenges that entrepreneurs have in like their earliest stages, like most of that information is available to you like for free. It's just, you know, do you have the time to actually figure out like what all of the information is, and then what information is most valuable for you, and then like stick with it. Like another hack. I did an event at the Seattle Public Library earlier this year, and talking to the head librarian, discovered that they actually have a resource for entrepreneurs. And if you schedule time, like they have lawyers from Microsoft and other leading tech companies that donate their time to be able to help entrepreneurs with like basic questions. So it was like, as I'm looking at this like lease for this retail space, like I scheduled time at the Seattle Public Library, had a Zoom call, and I talked to an attorney who had a background in like commercial real estate, and it's just like, these are the questions that I have for you related to this lease, and like, how would you address them? What should I push back on? It's free.
Yeah. That's interesting. And I'm always kind of shocked too, like even here, like in Berkeley, Public, there's just a lot of resources that are around that we can tap into.
Yeah, I think for me, man, what I find like to be most brilliant is when people ask, how did you do something? And then when you tell them like what you did, it's so basic that it's not like we raised a ton of money and just made it happen because we had the money. It was just like, nah, like we went to the public library and they gave us a little bit of information. They connected us to this person, and you know, you kind of Voltron it together. And I think in the beginning, because you're limited on capital and you're limited in experience, like it is your network that like pushes things through. Like even the realist, even like the space that I'm leasing, like it's down the street from my house. So like that was one part of the value proposition, is it's like, guys like, are you gonna be here every day? I'm like, I literally live down the street. I'm like, I eat at the restaurant 3 days a week right here. But the other flip side of it is just that one of my son's baseball coach worked in commercial real estate. And when I reached out to him and asked him just for some advice on like how to approach it, he was just like, oh, I know that guy. He's a great guy. Like, let me know if you need a word. I put a word in, blah, blah, blah. And like, that's also part of like how it happens.
Very real. So now bringing us back to just, you know, your brand specifically, Rockridge, can you talk a bit about online versus retail space and just, bringing those things home, especially for having a product that folks want to try on and things. We kind of mentioned that before. And then, but just balancing out the pop-ups versus online versus,
Yeah. So I would say, man, like everything is a proof of concept until you sort of figure it out. Consumer behavior changes year to year for a lot of different factors. We've been online for a while, and we spend a minimum amount of marketing dollars on traffic. And while we drive a good amount of business, I think the one thing that I've learned is just that business is largely transactional. And it's largely transactional. It's not bad business, but it's not a way to grow a business. And I think to grow a healthy business, you need to have more than one stream of revenue. And you also need to be able to have more, you need to have a physical touch point in order for people to be able to really sort of engage, understand, and like really value what the brand has to offer. I've done pop-ups in other people's retail spaces. I've done retail events at different trade shows and things of that nature. And I think the number one thing that I continue to come back to is that in order for Rockridge to really be able to express its point of view, we need to have our own space. And we need to be able to have a space where we can engage with our customer without any compromise. And I think for a healthy business, you want to have your revenue split between more than just like one channel. If I was just focusing on growing a digital channel, if advertising costs go up, that eats into my profit margin.
Yep.
If Apple decides not to allow Facebook to use not to use iPhones, to be able to do target marketing, then that's like 12 million people I can't really reach anymore.
Yeah.
On the other hand, strategically having a physical retail store allows me to start building a relationship with wholesale accounts, so that's another revenue channel and another expansion of growth for Rockridge. So what I would say is just like Rockridge is not a direct to consumer company. It is a traditional retail company that is tightly controlled strategically by me.
It's real. That's real. And that's the founder life.
So the plan is to be everywhere, but not everywhere. Like I don't need to own every point of distribution. But we do want to have retail partners that align with our values and our point of view, that allows us to be able to interact with the customer in different ways, that it isn't always coming through like a Rockridge lens. But I think when it does come through like a Rockridge lens, like you definitely know that it's Rockridge, which November 1st, 2024, you guys will see. Or actually November 1st, 2023.
I was about to say, I was like, you pushed yourself out a year, a couple months down the line. Now it's three questions that I ask everybody when they are on this series that I want to turn over to you. First of which, and you kind of spoke to this a bit already, you dropped like a lot of gems for folks, but if there was one thing that you could tell the aspiring early stage, idea stage entrepreneur, what would it be?
To be obsessive about your business and your industry.
Got it. I mean, you made that clear earlier, but I was like, so that is the top one.
Yeah, I mean, it's like again, man, I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I think the thing that sort of always I hear a lot is like, you need to be passionate. I would argue and say that I think you need to be obsessive, and I think you need to be disciplined. I was just like, because discipline will make you do things that when you don't want to do it and you have to do it. I generally think that entrepreneurs don't work hard enough or long enough on their projects, that I think that if you're really serious about business, 60 to 80 hours a week is like minimum. That I always work. I'm always working. I don't believe in work-life balance. For me, it's like all one thing. And yeah, like I think that's like part of being obsessive. And I think like if you really want it, like it sounds crazy, but it's like if you look at any professional athlete and you see then you got to be superstars. Just like the average professional athlete, like how much they sacrifice to be able to hone their craft and how much time they spend in the gym or like fine tuning their body or fine tuning their skill set is a very similar mindset that you need to have as an entrepreneur.
Mm.
The second thing I would say, and I know it's a lot, but I think the other thing I would say is just that I think we, especially as people of color, you have to really have a mindset of understanding that when you're building a business, you're in a competitive space. And you got to identify what are your strengths as an entrepreneur that gives you a competitive advantage. I was just saying, as well as what is your strengths as your business value proposition that gives you a competitive advantage, and to understand that that competitive advantage is dynamic and changes all the time.
Things to keep in mind. I'm putting these in the back of my mind for myself outside of my role here, for real. The second one is one that, you know, a lot of entrepreneurs talk about, and, you know, as it relates to your marketing and social media, you may not talk about, and I'm not sure if this is true for you, but you may not talk about the second guessing of yourself or doubts or things where it's like, you know, you put in the time and like maybe something that you planned out doesn't go as well, or, you know, you purchase something and it's not flying off the shelves in the way that you do. How do you deal with those feelings of, whether it be, you can call it doubt, you can call it second guessing, you can call it temporary setbacks, whatever it may be, that may not encourage you in the way that you want?
Yeah, there's always doubt. You know, I think you sort of, or at least for me, I have this sort of like high level euphoria, like, oh, I'm gonna do this thing. And then once it's kind of like mapped out and now I gotta actually execute it, then in my mind, I'm like, I think this gonna work. Like, and not even like the embarrassment. My first mind goes to like capital. It's just like, man, that's gonna be a lot of wasted money. Or like, you know, like how do I cover it? Or like, what's the next thing? And I think something that I've started to do, which is funny enough, but you know, this is a circle of trust. In the beginning, and I think when it was my money, anything that I wanted to do marketing, I would just like spend the money and do it, and there was no real ROI. Like now, there's a clear objective of what I'm trying to accomplish. There's a clear way in which I'm measuring it.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a clear financial model that is actually built out, that in order for us to win anything that we do, like it has to be revenue positive. Like if it's not revenue positive, then it's just a waste of money. I was just like, because it's not actually addressing the goals that we need to do, which is like these dollars have to recycle. And so I think once that framework is kind of set, and I share that with mentors, I share that with key people that I respect. Some of them are creative people, some of them are just like numbers people, some of them are like retail experts, so that I'm getting a variety of opinions from people that I like trust and respect with different points of view. And I think then I just execute and go forth. I don't necessarily feel like I'm like overly concerned about nervousness per se. You know, I think when things don't work out, I'm sort of I'm asking a question like, what did we do right or what did we do wrong? And generally what I would say is like, what I've done wrong was I didn't make the right decision, and that right decision means that I allocated too much capital in areas that weren't driving the results that I wanted.
Yeah, that's good. It's really just right about making sure that you're learning from any mistakes and having a way that you can incorporate the data or the decision-making process to move forward more knowledgeable and equipped.
I think the most important thing is just that you want to have a clear way of being able to measure success. And I'll like give an example. Like, I don't think the goal of having a pop-up shop for the holidays should be like, Well, we just want to have a retail experience and see how people like it. Like, I think that you really want to have a quantifiable goal of like, let's do a holiday pop-up shop. This is a one time of the year where people are going to spend a shit ton of money on themselves and on other people for gifts.
Yeah.
So this is a high period of time that if you're going to test out a retail space, like this would be the time to do it. If you can't sell shit during a holiday time, then you really have a problem.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's product or your brand messaging or whatnot. But then, like, the basics of it is just like, cool, we're going to do a retail spot. We know that we need to show up differently because we want to be able to attract attention. We know how much it's going to cost to be able to run this store, you know, per month. So if I'm spending on average $4,000 a month between like rent, utilities, and a staff of 1 or 2 people, we're going to be open 6 days a week. Like, I know what my average order value is online. Like, I know that the average person is buying 2 things online. So you kind of multiply, you know, it's like you divide your AOV by your overall operating expense. I'll plus it up 20 to 30%. So now I know what my run rate is. It's like, you know, first is if our overall operations cost is going to cost us $4,000 a month, is it realistic to be able to sell $6,000 to $7,000 worth of goods a month? And you can almost break that down by the day. You can assume like we're going to sell more clothes on Saturdays and Sundays and probably Fridays because you're just going to have a higher traffic during that period of time. During the week is going to be slow. Your first 1 or 2 weeks are kind of give you an indication on where you need to spend your marketing dollars. It's just like, do you spend it online and drive some of that traffic online, or do you, you know, reach out to local publications and just try and drive more awareness inside? And like the math will kind of figure it out. And if you feel confident that the math figures out and you know exactly what you need to do, we need to sell 3 to 4, we need to cover 3 to 4 transactions a day in order to hit this number. Then like the next step is like you look at your merchandising strategy. It's like, okay, what assortment of product that is seasonally right that we want to have in here? Some things that are going to be just more high end and more expensive because that's what they are, but also some things that are more lower priced that are entry level products that are seasonally specific, beanie, a t-shirt, socks, etc. And like the math will just tell you is just like how many units you need to order, how many styles you want to order, how many sizes you want to order. And if you don't sell it, then you're stuck with a lot of inventory that you're gonna have to discount in February.
Right. It's real.
That's like super fast.
But
so again, if we set up office hours, I'll walk you through the math. And the other thing I would say is like, man, like I start my mornings doing the hard stuff, which is like generally stuff that I don't want to do, which is like the hard math. And like I will look at that business model like every morning and like tweak it to like stress test it.
Got you. And then kind of closing us out, the last thing I've been asking folks, and I think you have more of an upbeat answer to the doubt question because it's like you just have to plan accordingly. But as it relates to Rockridge and, you know, somebody who does, you know, a lot of calculations and planning and trying to make these best steps in, you know, down the line, whether it's 5 years, 10 years, where do you see Rockridge? You spoke to it a bit earlier, but yeah, just to.
I think, look, man, in 5 years, I think realistically it could be a $5 to $10 million business. And that's looking at it at a very slow pace, as if I was just continuing to like self-fund it myself or work with community venture organizations like ESO. I think that if something was to happen to really be able to show that there's like this significant, consistent trajectory of like growth, and I could go raise a significant amount of money to be able to fund that growth, then I think that you're looking at like a $20 million business plus. Because now, and within, what do you say, 5 years? Yeah. So you're looking at within 5 years is just like we're in at least what I would say like the 6 major markets in the US. For me, in terms of who I'm targeting, would be San Francisco, Arizona, Boulder, Colorado, Utah, Austin, Atlanta, North Carolina, and maybe Miami. Why? You would ask, would I target those particular cities versus major metropolitan cities like LA or New York? Is because young people who have an interest in entrepreneurship or working in tech, those are the fastest growing cities over the last 3 to 4 years because of the low cost of living. But the other thing is just that there's not a strong presence for fashion brands that are out there outside of your big spot retailers like your Macy's.
Right.
That's why I'm targeting them.
It's real, but very understood. I know I'm like, it's taking notes and it's also just appreciative of how detailed and thorough you are in all the responses, and shows how much that you practice in what you preach in terms of being obsessive over these things and saying like you have to know these numbers and you have to be willing to put in the time, energy, and effort, because you said be passionate as much as you can, but passionate is not going to break down these numbers and see, am I allocating my time, energy, and resources in the right areas? Am I taking inventory of the output that comes from this? And am I making the adjustments that are able to make and break a business and decide how much profit and things that, are return on the investment that I'm putting in, whether it be, again, your own energy and waking up early and having discipline to do those things, your own funding, or if it's outside capital that are making those things.
The other thing I would say too, man, is like I think we all have doubt and we all deal with doubt, which for me is just another word for like risk. Like, I think being an entrepreneur is a risky endeavor. I just think it's up to you to determine like how much risk can you handle. And I think that if you're trying to do something that doesn't make you feel comfortable, that doesn't stress you out, that doesn't make you lose sleep, you probably just shouldn't do it, because I don't think it's like the best use of your time. That's what I would say, but it's just like, but with all of the detail that I gave you, I could still end up wrong.
Right. That's what I mean. Right. That's
so
what it's associated.
On the one hand, there's a high level of confidence that is just like, seems like, like thought through and then logic makes sense, but it's just like, I could still be wrong.
Yeah.
And I think what I would say to that is, I'll say this. I think the biggest impediment that Rockridge has faced to this day is the brand awareness is not out enough. And the reason why I say that is because for all of the transactions that we've done, like, we've yet to get a customer actually return an item. And so to me, what that signals is not like our product is that great. What it signals to me is just like, we're still not selling at a high enough volume and to a diverse enough number of people that we're getting returns. Because I'm like, even the most successful company gets returns. Like Louis Vuitton gets returns, Nike get returns.
Yeah, that's real. And so I know you talked about, office hours and resources and things a little bit, but for folks who want to reach you, obviously to purchase something from Rockridge, to follow, the brand on social media, and to learn more about, this winter pop-up as we close out, where can they find you?
So you can shop the brand at rockridgesf.com. You can follow us on Instagram at rockridgesf, and I actually still manage it. So if you hit me up, it is me who will respond.
Yeah.
And then the store opens November 1st, 2023 at 2946 College Avenue.
Cool. Again, just on behalf of myself and ESO Ventures, just want to thank you for your time, and just really the honesty and the openness of talking about, your entrepreneurial journey. And thank you again.
Yeah, and on behalf of Rockridge, I appreciate ESO for all of the support and resources that they've provided. This store is opening because of some funding from ESO. So
It's real.
They are a big partner in this. And I think we are still working on some details to have ESO at the space talking about what they do in a live format, I think for people who are ready to sort of take that next step in their entrepreneurship journey.
Well, we will catch you there November this year. We hope to see all y'all come out.
Thank you, everybody.
Cool?
Good timing?
Whoop.